The Threll Compact does not fight wars, it runs experiments. For 3,000 years, that has been the difference between the Compact and every empire it has ever erased. Soldiers die once, data survives forever. Its Directorate of Biological Assets has cataloged the immune systems of 400 species. It has ended 11 civilizations without firing a single conventional shot. It prefers a quieter method, a pathogen, a colony, a stopwatch. Now the Directorate has found a new subject. A small human settlement on the edge of contested space, 30,000 souls, barely defended, perfectly isolated. Its name is New Meridian. The Compact has been watching it for 6 years, long enough to catalog its farms, its clinics, its unremarkable frontier hospital, long enough to conclude, with the clinical confidence of an empire that has never once been wrong about a test subject, that humanity will die exactly like everything else. They do not know that New Meridian was never an ordinary colony. They do not know why its founders chose that name, or what it means to the people who built it. They are about to find out. 300 years ago, a species called the Ashvin lived on a temperate world at the edge of what is now Compact territory. A people of slow rivers and quiet cities who had never fired a weapon at another star system in their entire recorded history. The Directorate cataloged them for a decade before deciding they were worth testing. Their trial ran 4 days. It is, in Threll archives, remembered as one of the Doctrine's cleanest successes, a species with no engineered defenses, no warning, no chance. What the archives do not record, because no Threll observer ever thought to ask, is the last transmission the Ashvin sent from their capital before the pathogen finished its work. It was not a plea for help. It was a single recorded message, broadcast on every frequency their dying civilization still controlled, meant for no one in particular, because there was no one left to hear it. We did not know we were being tested. We hope, whoever finds this, that you do. Nobody found it for 300 years. Nobody was listening. The Compact moved on to its next trial within a season, confident, as it always was, that quiet efficiency left no trace worth following. The Compact's methods are old, older than most of the empires it now quietly studies. Its founding doctrine, written 3,000 years ago by a Threll biologist named Avrin Kale, still hangs in translated form in every Directorate briefing room across its territory. Conquest is inefficient, the doctrine reads. War wastes resources on populations that resist. Extinction, properly engineered, wastes nothing at all. Under that doctrine, the Compact has never needed a standing army the size of the Concords, never needed the political theater of a council vote, never needed to explain itself to 600 worlds watching from a gallery. It needed only patience, precision, and the quiet confidence that no species, however advanced, has ever outthought a pathogen built specifically to exploit its own biology. 11 civilizations learned that lesson before humanity ever crossed the Compact's notice. Some resisted for years. Some collapsed within weeks. All of them, without exception, died believing they understood the threat in front of them only after it was already too late to matter. The Compact does not celebrate these victories. It archives them, catalogs them, folds their genetic data into a growing library that makes each subsequent trial faster, cleaner, more certain than the last. New Meridian is meant to be the next entry in that library, nothing more. Overseer Cayley's Thorn Vehen has run 140 bioweapon trials in his career. He has never lost a subject population in fewer than 9 days. He stands now on the bridge of a Compact research vessel called the Still Water, watching a small blue-green world rotate beneath him, and feels the particular calm of a scientist who already knows the answer to his own question. Population confirmed, says his aide, a Threll technician named Usakor. 31,200 civilians. No planetary defense grid detected. No warships in system. This will be a clean trial, Overseer. They always are, Kaylee says. Deploy the agent. Kaylee reviews the mission parameters one final time before authorizing deployment, walking the still waters small bridge crew through a briefing he has delivered, in one form or another, 140 times before. Vector 9 targets the same cellular pathway in every mammalian species we have tested it against, he says. Rapid neural degradation, disguised initially as ordinary fever. By the time symptoms present as serious, the subject's nervous system has already begun to fail beyond recovery. This is not cruelty. It is efficiency. A clean trial produces clean data, and clean data serves every species the Compact studies. After this one. Understood, Overseer, says the ship's junior tactical officer, a young Threll named Ren Kesh Ilo, barely out of his training cycle. And the projected data yield. A complete map of human cellular response to engineered pathogens, Kaylee says. Immunological, neurological, genetic. Everything the Directorate needs to calibrate future operations against this species, should the Compact ever require broader action. Broader action, Ren repeats. You mean full contact, Overseer, conquest. I mean nothing so crude, Kaylee says. The Compact does not conquer. We simply ensure that when a decision is eventually made about a species' future, that decision is informed by complete data rather than assumption. What happens after this trial is not my concern. My concern is only that the data be accurate. Ren nods, though something in his posture suggests the distinction feels thinner to him than it does to his overseer. Before the deployment order is given, Usa raises the only objection anyone on the bridge of the still water will offer that day. Overseer, she says, the colony's medical infrastructure shows some unusual investment for a settlement this size. 3 research clinics for 31,000 people is a higher ratio than any comparable frontier world in our archive. Kaylee studies the readout without much interest. Humans are recent arrivals to interstellar space, USA. New species often overbuild their infrastructure out of inexperience, not preparation. It is a common trait among juvenile civilizations. Understood, Overseer. I only wish to note the discrepancy for the record. Noted, Kaylee says, already turning back to the deployment schedule. Humanity has existed as a spacefaring culture for less than a century. Whatever caution built those clinics, it will not be enough to matter. He does not consider the discrepancy again. 3,000 years of unbroken trial data has taught him that anomalies are noise, not signal, and that the only meaningful variable in any bioweapon trial is time. New Meridian does not see it coming. There is no fleet in the sky, no warning broadcast, no declaration of intent. Just a single unmarked delivery pod dropped into the upper atmosphere under cover of a routine meteor shower, releasing an aerosolized compound the Compact calls Vector 9. Within 6 hours, it is in the water table of every major settlement on the planet. Within 12 hours, the first hospital admissions begin. Fever, disorientation, a strange metallic taste that patients cannot explain. In New Meridian's largest clinic, Dr. Imani Oduya, chief of medicine, and one of the last surviving members of the original Aegis founding team, watches the first wave of admissions arrive with a clipboard in one hand and 40 years of quiet preparation behind her eyes. Fever presentation consistent with the drill scenarios, she tells her staff, moving between beds with practiced calm. I want full blood work on every admission, every 2 hours. If this is what we trained for, the antibody markers should start showing within 18 hours. A young nurse, born on New Meridian and too young to remember any of the founding briefings, looks up from a patient's chart with open fear. Dr. Oduya, if this isn't what we trained for. Then we adapt, Imani says. That's the whole point of what's in our blood right now. It doesn't need a perfect match to a drill. It needs data, and it's already collecting it faster than either of us can write it down. She checks her watch, calculating against a countdown she has carried in her head for decades. 18 hours, she says mostly to herself. Let's see if the old models were right. Within 24 hours, Colonial Director Sarah Cade stands in the new Meridian Command Center, reading the first casualty reports, and does something the Compact's simulations never accounted for. She smiles. "Sir," says a young medical officer beside her, mistaking the expression for shock. "Director, this is bad. Cross-referencing symptoms against every known pathogen in our database returns nothing. This isn't natural." "No," Sarah agrees, "it isn't." "Then what do we do?" Sarah turns to the officer, and there is nothing in her face resembling panic. "We do what this colony was built to do," she says. "Sound the Aegis alert. Tell every household the same 4 words their grandparents heard." "What 4 words, Director?" Sarah looks out the window at a city that, in 6 hours, has begun coughing, but has not begun dying. "It's finally happening," she says. Across New Meridian's small capital, ordinary colonists live through the first hours of the outbreak without any of the strategic clarity sitting in their command center. A farmer named Ruth Acaffer wakes with a fever she cannot explain, checks her 2 children for the same symptoms, and finds them both running warm as well. She does not know about Vector 9. She does not know about the Compact, or the Aegis Genome, or the decades of preparation folded quietly into her family's DNA before any of them were born. She only knows the emergency broadcast that plays on every household terminal at the same moment, a message every new Meridian citizen has heard exactly once before, during their mandatory colonial orientation, and hoped never to hear again outside of a drill. "This is not a drill," the broadcast says. "Fever and disorientation are expected. Remain calm. Your body is doing exactly what it was built to do." Ruth holds her children close and watches the fever break within hours, faster than any illness she has ever nursed them through, and understands, without needing the full technical explanation, that her family has just survived something the rest of the galaxy was never supposed to let them survive. By the second evening, New Meridian's clinics are not overwhelmed with dying patients. They are overwhelmed with recovering ones, filling out discharge paperwork, comparing notes with neighbors, already turning what should have been a mass grave into something closer to a strange, shared inconvenience. To understand why New Meridian smiled instead of panicked, you have to understand what happened to Earth 90 years before the Threll Compact ever found it. The event has no official name in most of the galaxy's records because no alien empire was watching closely enough to document it. On Earth, it has only ever needed one: the long winter. It began in a crowded coastal city, an engineered pathogen released not by aliens, but by a splinter faction of humanity's own late-stage bioweapons research, desperate men chasing an arms race nobody else knew existed. It killed 400 million people in 11 months. The world that emerged from those 11 months barely resembled the one that entered them. Entire coastal megacities stood empty within a year, their populations scattered or gone. Governments that had spent a century building rival arsenals found themselves, for the first time in human history, facing an enemy neither side had built to fight. Hospitals ran out of beds before they ran out of patients. Crematoriums ran day and night for months and still fell behind. Dr. Amara Voss was 29 years old when the outbreak began, a junior researcher at an underfunded immunology lab that nobody in her government took particularly seriously. She lost her younger brother in the plague's 3rd month, and her research notes from that period, later declassified and studied by generations of Aegis scientists after her, contain a line that would eventually be carved into the entrance of every Aegis research facility built afterward. Grief is not a strategy, but it can fund one if you let it. By the plague's 9th month, Amara's small lab had produced the first working treatment protocol, cobbled together from desperate international collaboration that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. It saved millions. It did not save enough. When the International Emergency Council convened in the plague's final weeks to plan humanity's recovery, Amara was the youngest person in the room, and the only one who arrived with a plan for the next crisis instead of just the current one. It should have ended civilization. Instead, it produced the single most important scientific mobilization in human history. A young immunologist named Dr. Amara Voss, no relation to the man who would later find a crashed scout ship in a Siberian field, but remembered by history for reasons just as significant, led the international effort that finally broke the long winter's death spiral. She did not stop with a cure. A cure treats the last war, she told the Emergency Council that funded her research in the plague's final year. I want to build a species that has already survived the next one. What followed was called, in classified records, the Aegis Genome Initiative. Not a vaccine, not a single treatment. An entire architecture of adaptive human biology built into the genetic baseline of every child born after the long winter's end, refined and improved across 3 generations. The first generation of Aegis carriers, born in the decade immediately following the plague, were volunteers in the truest sense, their parents signing consent forms that acknowledged, in careful legal language, that nobody could promise the treatments would work exactly as intended. Early trials produced failures alongside successes. Some genetic scaffolds proved unstable. A handful of pilot programs were quietly shut down when early results raised concerns that took years to fully resolve. Amara Voss did not live to see the second generation reach adulthood. She died at 71, having spent the last 4 decades of her life refining a program she always insisted was not really about disease at all. Every plague in human history caught us by surprise, she told a graduating class of young immunologists in one of her final public lectures, a recording later preserved in every Aegis training archive. I am tired of surprise. I want the next threat, whatever it is, wherever it comes from, to meet a species that has already decided not to be caught unprepared again. Nobody in that lecture hall, in a modest auditorium on a planet that had not yet made contact with another living species, understood how literally she meant the second half of that sentence. The scientists who inherited her program after her death did, because by then, the crashed scout ship in the Siberian field had already been found, and the 2 great secret undertakings of human history, one built from grief, one built from a farmer's frozen field, had quietly become partners in the same long war of patience. The core principle was simple, even if the science took 40 years to perfect. Human immune systems would no longer just fight known threats. They would learn unknown ones, faster than any pathogen could evolve past them, using a synthetic genetic scaffold that behaved less like an immune system and more like a standing intelligence agency inside every human cell. It was expensive. It was slow. It required a level of global cooperation humanity had never managed before and has rarely managed since. And it worked so well that by the time Dr. Ilya Voss found a crashed alien scout ship decades later, the 2 great secret programs of human history, one biological, one military, quietly agreed to become one. If the Conquered, or any empire like it, ever came testing humanity's limits, Aegiscarian colonists would be humanity's first line of proof. The program was never advertised as a defense initiative. Publicly, Aegis generation children were simply healthier, more resilient, statistically less likely to succumb to ordinary disease. Their parents were told, truthfully, that the treatments would give their children a longer, safer life. What they were not told, because the classification predated most of their own security clearances, was the second purpose folded into every genetic scaffold. Every Aegis carrier's immune system was built to keep a record, not just of what it fought, but of how. Encoded alongside each adaptive response was a compressed genetic log, designed to be extracted and studied by anyone with the right sequencing equipment, turning every survivor into a walking laboratory report on whatever had tried to kill them. Colonial founders were selected with unusual care for a simple frontier settlement. Immunologists, geneticists, field epidemiologists who had spent their careers preparing for exactly the kind of test nobody expected to arrive from beyond the solar system. New Meridian's official charter, filed with the Terran Coalition decades before the first colonist landed, listed its purpose as agricultural expansion and long-range xenobiology research. The second half of that description was more honest than anyone outside a very small circle ever realized. New Meridian was built for exactly that purpose. Its 31,000 colonists were not chosen at random. Every one of them carries the third and most advanced generation of the Aegis genome, refined specifically to recognize engineered pathogens, the kind no natural evolution would ever produce. They were not sent to the frontier to farm. They were sent to wait. Kaylee's Thorn Vhen reviews the first 24 hours of biometric data from New Meridian with the mild irritation of a scientist whose experiment is running slightly behind schedule. Fever onset in 91% of exposed subjects, USA reports, consistent with projections. Disorientation in 74%, also consistent. And mortality, Kaylee's asks. USA hesitates, 0 overseer. Kaylee's turns from the viewport. 0. At 24 hours. Vector 9 has a projected first fatality window of 18 hours in every prior human-adjacent trial. I am aware, overseer, the data is unusual. Unusual is not a category, Kaylee says. Run the diagnostic again. The diagnostic returns the same result. Fever breaking in the earliest exposed subjects. Disorientation fading. A strange biochemical signature appearing in colonist bloodwork that the Compact's medical database does not recognize at all. Overseer, USA says carefully, there is something forming in their blood, some kind of counteragent. It does not match anything in our records. Kaylee stares at the readout for a long moment. 3,000 years of compact bioweapon doctrine offering him nothing useful to say. Deploy a second dose, he orders. Triple concentration. If their biology is compensating, we increase the load until it cannot. The second dose reaches New Meridian's water table 19 hours later. Sarah Cade watches the alert scroll across her command display without visible surprise. They're doubling down, says the young medical officer beside her, voice tight. Director, if our own models are right, this concentration should over. Whelmed. It won't, Sarah says. How can you be sure? Sarah gestures to a secondary display, one not connected to any compact visible network, showing real-time data from every Aegis-monitored colonist on the planet. Antibody production climbing. Neural inflammation markers dropping. A synthetic genetic response humanity spent 90 years engineering, finally doing exactly what it was built to do. Because this isn't the first dose we've survived, Sarah says. It's the 412th. The medical officer blinks. 412th. Simulated, Sarah clarifies. Every strain the Aegis program could imagine, tested in isolated labs for 3 generations, on volunteers who understood exactly what they were signing up for. We didn't know which empire would eventually test us for real. We just knew, eventually, someone would. She watches the second wave of fever crest and begin to break across the city, faster this time, the colony's engineered biology having already learned the shape of the threat. Tell the network, she says, Phase 1 is complete. Kaylee's receives the second failure report with the particular, controlled fury of a man who has never had to explain a failed trial to his superiors. Triple concentration, he says, reading the numbers USA has placed in front of him. 0 fatalities. Antibody response forming faster on the second exposure than the first. Their bodies are learning the pathogen, Overseer, USA says. Not just resisting it, learning it. I have never seen an immune response with this kind of predictive adaptation, not in 400 cataloged species. Then we are looking at something new, Kaylee says slowly. A modified population, engineered deliberately to survive exactly this kind of trial. He turns to the viewport, to the small blue-green world that no longer looks nearly as unremarkable as it did 2 days ago. This was never an undefended colony, he says. This was bait. USA's voice when it comes is quieter than before. Overseer, if that is true, then this trial was never truly a secret from them. Kaylee's does not answer right away. He is remembering, now, the 6 years of quiet compact surveillance that led him here, the unremarkable clinics, the unremarkable farms, all of it presented with a patience that, in hindsight, feels less like ignorance and more like performance. Recall the delivery pod's telemetry, he orders. I want to know exactly how much of our approach vector was visible to their sensors before we ever launched. The answer, when it comes 20 minutes later, changes the shape of the entire mission. All of it, Overseer, USA says, staring at her console. Their sensor network logged our research vessel the moment we entered system, 6 days before deployment. Kaylee's closes his eyes. They let us test them. Yes, Overseer. Why? Nobody on the bridge of the still water has an answer. But 31,000 kilometers below them, in a command center built specifically for this exact moment, Sarah Cade is about to give one. In New Meridian's central research facility, Dr. Imani Oduya and a team of 11 geneticists have not slept in 30 hours, working through the night on a problem the colony trained for but never truly expected to face. The antibody structure is stabilizing faster than the models predicted, says one of her researchers, a young man named Tomas Reyes who was a teenager during the last major Aegis recalibration drill. If the pattern holds, we'll have a full sequence within 6 hours. A sequence isn't a weapon, Imani says, eyes fixed on the data cascading across her display. We need to know what it does to them, not just what it does for us. The retrieval pod samples, quietly diverted by colony technicians before the Compact's automated collection systems could reclaim them, sit in a containment unit at the center of the lab, the first confirmed genetic material from a Threll body New Meridian has ever obtained. Their cellular structure is close enough to ours that the antibody response should translate, Tomas says, running the comparison again to be sure. Close enough to be dangerous to them if we're right about the delivery method. Imani studies the readout for a long moment, weighing 40 years of careful, defensive research against the far more aggressive possibility now sitting on her screen. We were built to survive, she says quietly, not to attack. Director Cade needs to know exactly what we're capable of before she decides what to do with it. And if she asks us to weaponize it, Imani does not answer right away. She is thinking of the long winter, of stories passed down from her own grandmother, of a species that once nearly destroyed itself learning exactly this lesson the hard way. Then we'll have decided something the Compact never had to, she says finally, whether surviving a test is different from winning a war. The completed counteragent reaches Sarah Cade's desk 2 hours later, alongside a note from Imani that reads simply, "It works. Your call, what happens next?" The transmission reaches the still water on a frequency the Compact has never shared outside its own command structure. The same trick a fleet admiral used against a different empire years earlier. Proof that some lessons in the growing quiet war against Earth's neighbors travel faster than any single victory. Sarah Cade's face resolves on Kaylee's Thorn Vihen's screen, calm, steady, entirely unafraid. Overseer Kaylee's Thorn Vhen, she says. My name is Colonial Director Sarah Cade, New Meridian Colony Terran Coalition. I imagine you have questions. Kaylee straightens. 4 centuries of compact discipline, the only thing keeping his voice level. You allowed us to deploy a weapon against your own population. We allowed you to test a weapon against a population built specifically to survive it, Sarah corrects. There's a difference. 31,000 people just lived through something your directorate has used to erase 11 civilizations. Every one of them is alive tonight. You endangered your own citizens to prove a point, Kaylee says. They volunteered for exactly this, generations before they were born, Sarah says. Every colonist on this planet carries genetic countermeasures 90 years in the making. You didn't find an undefended colony, Overseer. You found the one place in human space built to survive precisely what you brought. Kaylee's is silent for a long moment, the calculation running behind his 4 eyes with the same cold precision he has applied to 140 prior trials. Then this was a trap, he says finally. It was a test, Sarah says. Yours and ours, yours failed. Ours is only getting started. Something in her tone makes Ussa, standing behind Kaylee's chair, go very still. What does that mean? Kaylee's asks. Sarah's expression does not change, but something behind her eyes sharpens, the same way Alina Cross's once did, on a different bridge, in a different first contact, years before New Meridian ever existed. It means, she says, that every colonist your pathogen touched has spent the last 48 hours producing a counteragent inside their own bodies. Our labs have been studying it in real time. It turns out your Vector 9 wasn't just survivable, Overseer. It was useful. Kaylee's feels something cold settle behind his sternum, an emotion Threll biology rarely produces, and Threll doctrine has no protocol for. Useful for what? He asks, though some part of him already suspects the answer. For understanding exactly what your species is vulnerable to, Sarah says. You spent 3,000 years cataloging other people's immune systems, Overseer. You never once thought to protect your own. The transmission cuts. Aboard the still water, alarms begin sounding across every deck at once, a pattern none of the crew have ever drilled for, because the Compact has never once needed to drill for an attack that starts inside its own biology. It begins quietly, the way New Meridian's own crisis began 2 days earlier. A maintenance technician in the ship's lower decks reports a fever, then 2 more. Then, within an hour, a full quarter of the crew. Report, Kaylee snaps, watching medical alerts cascade across the bridge display. Overseer, Ussa says, voice tight with something close to panic, our own crew. Symptoms match the New Meridian colonists' initial presentation almost exactly. Fever, disorientation, but she stops. But what? Kaylee's presses. But the biochemical signature isn't Vector 9, Ussa says. It's something new, something built from Vector 9's genetic structure but re-engineered. Our own weapon, Overseer, turned inside out and handed back to us. Kaylee stares at the readout, understanding arriving with the weight of an entire doctrine collapsing at once. They didn't just survive our trial, he says quietly. They studied it, they reverse-engineered it, and they built a counterweapon specifically calibrated to Threll physiology, using the 48 hours we gave them while we congratulated ourselves on a clean test. How did they deliver it? Ussa asks. We have had no physical contact with the surface, no away teams, no supply exchange. Kaylee's eyes drift to the delivery pod telemetry, still open on a side display. The same pod that carried Vector 9 to the surface 2 days earlier, retrieved by automated systems per standard directorate protocol for sample collection. He understands, a half-second before Ussa says it aloud, exactly how thorough New Meridian's trap really was. The retrieval pod, Ussa says, horror creeping into her voice. Overseer, the pod we recovered for sample analysis. It never should have come back clean. It didn't, Kaylee says. It came back exactly the way they wanted it to. New Meridian's countermeasure spreads through the still waters population, with the same quiet precision vector 9 onc. E spread through the colony below, except this time. There is no engineered biology waiting to break the fever before it becomes fatal. Ren Kesh Ilo, the young tactical officer who questioned Kaylee's about broader action only days earlier, is among the first crew members to report symptoms. He sits at his station through the first hour of fever, insisting he is fit for duty, until the ship's medical officer finally overrides him and orders him confined to the infirmary. I authorize the deployment schedule, Ren says weakly, as two crewmates help him from his chair. If this is the cost of that authorization, I should be the one to carry it. You'll carry it better alive, the medical officer replies, guiding him toward the infirmary doors. Save the philosophy for after the fever breaks. It does not break, not the way New Meridian's colonists' fevers did. By the third hour, 40% of the crew is symptomatic. By the sixth hour, the ship's chief medical officer reports the first confirmed fatality, a junior engineering technician, and Kaylee's understands, watching the number climb, exactly how it feels to be on the losing side of one of his own trials. Ren survives the crossing, though it takes 3 more days in the infirmary before he can stand unassisted again. He does not speak much about the experience afterward, but he requests, once he is well enough to file reports again, a transfer out of the Directorate's trial operations and into the newly formed Verification Division, a request Kaylee's personally approves without comment. Kaylee's looks at the small blue-green world on the viewport, no longer unremarkable, no longer a clean test subject, no longer anything the Directorate's 400 prior trials prepared him to face. Withdraw, he says. Full retreat, emergency jump protocol immediately. And the crew already infected. Kaylee's is quiet for a long moment. We take them with us. Whatever this colony has done to them, it is ours to solve now, not theirs. Below decks, the young technician Usakor sits beside the engineering colleague she flagged first, watching the fever finally break on the medical monitor between them, uncertain whether to feel relief or dread. You're stable, she tells him, checking the readout twice to be sure. Whatever they built, it isn't lethal, not to us, not yet. Small comfort, the technician mutters, still pale. We came here to prove something dies fast. Instead, we're the ones who almost did. Usa doesn't answer right away. She is thinking about the clinics she flagged before deployment, the discrepancy Kaylee's dismissed as inexperience, and wondering how many other anomalies in 3,000 years of compact trial data were never noise at all. Overseer, she says instead, standing to deliver the ship's final casualty count before the jump. 1 confirmed fatality, 39 still symptomatic, stabilizing under our own medical staff's care. No further deaths projected, based on the recovery curve we're seeing in the earliest cases. Kaylee's absorbs the number in silence, the first trial report of his 300-year career that ends with his own species' name in the casualty column. Log it accurately, he says. Every failure this doctrine has ever produced was buried the moment it became inconvenient. I will not compound this one by doing the same. It is, in its own way, the first honest thing Kaylee's Thorn Vhen has said since arriving in this system. Sarah Cade watches the still waters engines flare to full power on her tactical display. The compact research vessel breaking orbit in a retreat pattern her own analysts predicted with unsettling accuracy 3 days earlier. They're running, says the young medical officer beside her, disbelief plain in his voice. Director, they're actually running. Of course they are, Sarah says. They came here to test whether we could survive their weapon. We just showed them something far more dangerous. We can survive their weapon, understand it, and hand it back. Should we pursue? The officer asks. We have the counteragent, we could. No, Sarah says, cutting him off gently. We are not going to chase a retreating ship into a war we haven't been asked to fight yet. That was never the point of New Meridian. Then what was the point? Sarah looks out at the sky, at the fading engine trail of a compact vessel that arrived certain of its own superiority, and is leaving with a lesson it will never be able to unlearn. The point, she says, was to make sure that the next time an empire looks at a human colony and sees an easy trial, they remember this one first. She turns from the window, back toward the command center, back toward a colony that has spent generations preparing for a single, unbearable question, and finally received its answer. Signal the coalition, she says. Tell them Phase 2 is complete, and tell them we have something the labs back home are going to want very badly. A full genetic profile of Threll physiology, harvested under perfect trial conditions, at absolutely no cost to us. The transmission takes 6 days to reach Earth, relayed through listening posts humanity built decades before New Meridian's first colonist was born. In the command bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, Fleet Admiral Elena Cross reads the report twice before she allows herself to react. 0 fatalities among the colonists, she says. A working counteragent developed in under 48 hours. A full physiological profile of an entirely new hostile empire, obtained without losing a single soldier. Marcus, standing beside her as he has for years, reads the same report over her shoulder. The Aegis program finally proved itself. It proved something more important than that, Elena says. It proved that the Threll Compact tests species the same way we once expected the Conquered to. Quietly, patiently, assuming nobody is watching back. She turns to the star map, to a new marker now blinking at the edge of contested space, far beyond New Meridian. Deep in territory the Compact has controlled uncontested for 3,000 years. They've been doing this for centuries, she says. 11 civilizations gone, and nobody ever traced the pattern because nobody ever survived long enough to compare notes. Until now, Marcus says. Until now, Elena agrees. She looks at the report's final line, a note added personally by Sarah Cade before transmission, and reads it aloud, quietly, the way a person reads something they intend to remember for a very long time. They tested a weapon they were certain would work, the note reads. We tested whether we could turn it into something better. Only one of those experiments failed. Elena sets the report down. Get me everything we have on Threll Compact territory, she says. Every listening post, every intercepted transmission, every scrap of data New Meridian's labs can extract from that counteragent. If they've done this to 11 other species, I want to know which ones are still alive to be warned. Marcus pulls up a star chart, the Compact's known territory sprawling far beyond anything Sol Defense Command has previously mapped in detail. That's a lot of dark space to search, Admiral. We don't have listening posts anywhere near their core systems. Then we build them, Elena says, the same way we built everything else. Quietly, patiently, and long before anyone thinks to ask why. And if the Compact retaliates against New Meridian directly, a full invasion fleet instead of a single research vessel. Elena considers that, watching the star map's new marker pulse at the edge of contested space. Then New Meridian will do what it was built to do, and will do what we've always done. We show up when it matters, not before. That's a lot of faith in one colony, Admiral. It's not faith, Elena says. It's 90 years of data. Sarah Cade's people didn't get lucky down there. They got exactly the outcome 3 generations of scientists designed them to get. I put that up against faith any day. She looks one more time at Sarah's final note, the words already committing themselves to memory the way only the truly important ones do. Draft a response, Elena says. Tell the Coalition Council New Meridian is to be treated as a forward-listening post effective immediately. Full Sol Defense Command support authorized. And tell Director Cade something else personally from me." "What's that, Admiral?" Elena allows herself, for the first time since reading the report, something close to a smile. "Tell her Dr. Voss would have been proud, both of them. Tell her Dr. Voss would have been proud, both of them." In the weeks between the Still Waters retreat and Kaylee's Thorn Vehen's second appearance before the Directorate's ruling council, word of New Meridian's survival travels farther than any single transmission ever intended. It reaches a shipbuilding station on the Compact's outer rim, where dockworkers whisper about a human colony that turned a trial pathogen back on the ship that carried it, a story too strange to be anything but true. It reaches a mining outpost near what remains of Ashvin territory, where the descendants of refugees who fled before the trial reached their homeworld gather to hear a recording none of them expected to exist. It reaches a species called the Corvith, silicate-based and slow-moving, who lost 60% of their population to a compact trial 200 years earlier, and have spent every generation since quietly rebuilding beneath the notice of an empire they assumed would never again think of them at all. Their elders debate for weeks whether the story can possibly be real, whether any species could survive what theirs did not, until a listening post seated by Sol Defense Command finally confirms it directly, in their own language, translated with a care no compact broadcast has ever bothered to offer them. Humanity does not orchestrate any of this. It does not need to. 90 years of quiet preparation taught Sarah Cade and Elena cross both the same lesson New Meridian's founders already understood. Nothing spreads faster than proof that survival is possible. Sol Defense Command does not send warships to any of these worlds in the months that follow. It sends listening posts, quiet observers, small unarmed vessels carrying nothing more dangerous than an offer to listen. 17 systems respond within the first 90 days. Some are cautious. Some are afraid to believe the story at all, having learned across centuries of compact rule that hope is often simply grief that has not yet arrived. A handful, quietly and carefully, begin asking the same question New Meridian was built to answer, decades before any of them knew to ask it. What happens if we survive the next test? Kaylee's Thorn Vehen stands before the Directorate's ruling council 4 weeks later, delivering a report that will end his career and quietly begin to unravel 3,000 years of compact doctrine. "Explain to this council," says the presiding overseer, an ancient Threll whose authority predates the founding of half the worlds the compact now claims, how a single unarmed colony defeated a bioweapon trial with a 100% historical success rate. "They were never unarmed," Kaylee says. "They were engineered, generations in advance, specifically to survive exactly this kind of test. And once they survived it, they turned our own weapon into a counteragent calibrated to our physiology, using nothing more than a retrieval pod we handed them ourselves." Silence spreads through the chamber, the particular silence of an institution encountering a category of failure it has no protocol for. "How many of our previous trial subjects," the presiding overseer asks slowly, "might have survived if they had simply been given more time?" A second council member, an older Threll strategist named Orvin Keshler, leans forward before Kaylee's can answer. "That question is irrelevant to this session. Our concern is not the past 11 trials. Our concern is whether this human species now possesses a working countermeasure to Vector 9, and whether that countermeasure can be replicated against future Directorate operations." "It already has been replicated," Kaylee says, "against us, aboard my own vessel." The chamber stirs at that, a ripple of unease passing through beings who have spent 3,000 years believing themselves the only ones capable of turning biology into a weapon. "Then this is no longer a colonial matter," Orvin says. "This is a defense matter. I move that the Directorate suspend all further trials against Terran Coalition territory pending a full review of our own vulnerabilities. You would halt 3,000 years of doctrine, another Council member objects, over a single failed trial. I would halt it, Orvin says, because a single failed trial has just demonstrated that our doctrine assumes something no longer true. It assumes we test, and others are tested. This colony tested us back, Overseer, using our own delivery pod in fewer than 48 hours. I would like this council to sit with that fact before it decides what happens next. The presiding Overseer allows the silence to stretch before turning back to Kaylee's. How many of our previous trial subjects, the presiding Overseer asks slowly, might have survived if they had simply been given more time? Kaylee's does not answer immediately. He is thinking of 11 erased civilizations, of 400 cataloged immune systems, of a doctrine built entirely on the assumption that no test subject would ever be prepared for the test. I do not know, he says finally, but I believe, Overseer, that we are no longer the only ones running experiments. I do not know, he says finally, but I believe, Overseer, that we are no longer the only ones running experiments. The Council's ruling, when it finally arrives 3 days later, surprises no one more than Kaylee's himself. Full suspension of Directorate operations against Terran Coalition territory, pending direct contact. Kaylee's Thorn V. Hen, stripped of his research vessel command but not, as many expected, stripped of his standing entirely, is ordered to lead a delegation to New Meridian and determine, in person, exactly what the Compact is now facing. You are being given an unusual second chance, Overseer, the presiding Overseer tells him privately before the delegation departs. 3,000 years of doctrine does not survive a single failed trial. It survives because someone is willing to learn from it. See that you are that someone. Kaylee's arrives at New Meridian 6 weeks after the Still Waters retreat, aboard an unarmed transport painted a stark, deliberate white, broadcasting a peace signal on a frequency. The colony's own listening posts confirm within minutes of the ship's arrival. He is met not by a fleet, not by a foe, artified perimeter, but by Sarah Cade herself, standing on an open landing field beneath the same pale afternoon sun that has watched over New Meridian since its founding. Overseer, she says. I no longer hold operational command, Kaylee says, but the title persists on Compact records. I find I have not yet decided whether to correct it. Titles are strange that way, Sarah says. You came a long way to have this conversation on foot. I wanted to see the colony myself, Kaylee's admits, looking past her at the quiet city beyond the field, ordinary streets, ordinary people, nothing in its architecture suggesting the trial that nearly ended it 6 weeks earlier. 3,000 years of Compact doctrine, and I have never once walked among a trial subject population that survived long enough to walk among. Most people here don't know how close it was, Sarah says. We'd like to keep it that way as long as we can. Fear doesn't build a colony, it just makes people harder to lead. Kaylee's considers that, filing it away alongside every other assumption New Meridian has quietly dismantled, since his first trial report reached the Directorate. I have come to ask you something plainly, Director, he says, because my council can no longer afford to guess. What does this colony, and by extension your coalition, want from the Threll Compact? Sarah is quiet for a moment, choosing her words with the same care she has shown in every transmission since the crisis began. 3 things, she says. First, a full accounting. Every trial the Compact has run against a sentient species, every world catalogued and erased, made public to every civilization your empire still claims dominion over. Not as punishment, as a record. The Ashvin sent a message before they died that nobody ever heard. We'd like to make sure nobody else has to send one into silence again. Kaylee's expression does not change, but something behind his 4 eyes does, a recognition Sarah cannot quite name but clearly registers. You know about the Ashvin. We know about all 11, Sarah says. Our listening posts have been quietly cataloging compact history for longer than you'd probably like to know. We didn't come to this conversation blind, Overseer. We came prepared to have it. What else? Kaylee's asks, voice quieter now. Second, Sarah continues, an end to unilateral trials against any species that has not consented to them, verified by observers from outside the Compact's own command structure. You do not need to trust us to accept that condition. You only need to accept that a species capable of doing what New Meridian did to Vector 9 is also capable of doing considerably worse, if given sufficient reason. Kaylee's absorbs the implicit warning without flinching, the same cold calculation he applies to every variable in a trial now turned, for the first time, toward his own civilization's survival. And the third. Sarah's expression hardens, just slightly, the same shift Alina Cross once showed a different conquered officer, in a different first contact, on a different, colder field. The third, she says, is that the counteragent our labs built from your own delivery pod stays exactly where it is, unused, unreleased, a weapon we have chosen not to deploy, as long as the Compact gives us no reason to reconsider that choice. We are not interested in becoming the next empire that tests other species to see how they die, Overseer. We only want to make sure nobody mistakes our restraint for an inability to do exactly that. The words settle over the open field, carried on a wind that, 6 weeks earlier, might have carried something considerably more lethal. I cannot promise the Directorate will accept all 3 conditions, Kaylee says finally. 3,000 years of doctrine does not unmake itself for a single failed trial, however costly. I know, Sarah says. That's why we're not asking for an afternoon. She looks past him, toward the white transport that carried him here and beyond it, toward a sky that, for the first time in New Meridian's short history, holds more questions than answers. We spent 90 years building a species that could survive being tested, she says. We can be patient for however long it takes the rest of the galaxy to understand what that means. What we will not do, ever again, is let another Ashvin die without anyone listening. Kaylee's is quiet for a long moment, looking out at the quiet streets of a colony that, by every metric his doctrine has ever used, should not still be standing. There is something else you should know, he says finally, before I return to deliver your terms. The Compact is not the only empire in this region running trials of this kind. We are simply the oldest and the most thorough. If word of New Meridian's survival spreads as widely as I suspect it will, others will come looking, not to test you the way we did, but to understand how you did it. Then let them come, Sarah S. Eyes. We built this colony to answer exactly that question, whoever ends up asking it. 6 months after Kaylee's visit, the Threll Compact's ruling council formally suspends all unilateral bioweapon trials against species with unverified consent, the first amendment to Avrin Kale's founding doctrine in 3,000 years of Compact history. It is not unanimous. It is not permanent. Kaylee's, restored to a reduced command within the Directorate's newly created verification division, spends the rest of his career ensuring it survives long enough to matter. Far away, in a command center on a frontier world called New Meridian, Sarah Cade stands at a window overlooking a city that, 4 weeks ago, nearly became a footnote in another empire's research archive. The streets below are quiet, ordinary, unremarkable in exactly the way the colony's founders always hoped they would remain. Children walk to school. Farmers tend fields under a pale afternoon sun. Nobody outside the command center fully understands how close the last month came to being the colony's last. Marcus's counterpart on New Meridian, a young officer named Divan Akoro, joins her at the window. The Coalition wants to know if we're prepared for a second Compact vessel. Command thinks it's likely, now that word of this trial's failure has had time to spread. We're prepared, Sarah says. We were built to be prepared before this colony had a single building. And if it's not just one vessel next time. Sarah watches a child chase a dog across a quiet street, entirely unaware of the empire that tried, 4 weeks ago, to end her world in 18 hours. Then we'll be ready for that too, Sarah says. That's what this colony was always for. Devan looks out at the same quiet street Sarah has been watching, at Ruth Acaffer walking her children home from the clinic, both fully recovered, laughing about something neither adult in the command center will ever hear. They don't know how close it was, Devan says. Most of them still think it was some kind of natural outbreak, a bad flu season. Let them think that, Sarah says. The Aegis founders never wanted their children living in fear of a war they might never see. They wanted them living. There's a difference, and it's the whole reason any of this worked. And if the truth gets out anyway. Sarah watches Ruth's youngest chase the family dog around a corner, small and unhurried and entirely unaware of the empire that briefly considered ending her before she ever had the chance to grow up. Then it gets out because we chose to survive loudly enough that it couldn't stay hidden, Sarah says. Not because we lost. She turns from the window, back toward a command center that has not stopped working since the day the first fever broke. The Threll Compact spent 3,000 years testing other species to see how they die, she says. We just spent 90 years testing ourselves to see how we survive. I know which experiment I trust more. Beyond New Meridian sky, past the edge of a border the Compact has controlled uncontested for longer than human civilization has existed. A report begins circulating through the ruins of empires nobody thought to warn until now. On a shattered world the Compact catalogs only by number, a species of burrowing survivors who lost 80% of their population to a trial 3 centuries ago still gather, out of habit, in the deep tunnels their ancestors built to escape a plague they never understood. A relay station Sol Defense Command quietly seated in that system months earlier finally activates, carrying a single translated message across a frequency the Compact has never bothered to monitor in a system it considers long since pacified. You were not the only ones tested. You were not the last to survive it. Someone else is looking for you now. It is not a rescue. Alina Cross is careful, in every briefing that follows, to make sure nobody in Sol Defense Command mistakes it for one. It is a single message, sent to a single ruined world, the first thread in a search that will take years to finish and may never find anyone left able to answer. But it is a start, in the same way New Meridian's survival was a start, in the same way a farmer finding a crashed ship in a frozen field was a start, 4 decades before humanity ever needed to prove it could survive what came next. A colony tested a weapon and lived. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, 10 other silent civilizations, still standing but broken, are about to learn that they were never actually alone in that trial. They were simply the ones who never got to test something back. Until now. And